Welcome back. To try and wrap up by assessing the standing of both America and Al-Qaeda in the Arab and Islamic world, I'm joined once again by Chris Hedges, formerly of the New York Times, and Professor Georges of the Islamic Studies. Let me start with you, Chris. In terms of where I left off with Michael Scher, America is reaping what it sowed in the Middle East, and it doesn't look very pretty. The war on Al-Qaeda has already led to 2 invasions, occupations, and war by proxies in the Middle East. Certainly, America is not very popular today in the Arab and the Muslim world, is it?
No, and with good reason. We have abandoned diplomacy as an instrument of foreign policy, walked away from the Palestinians, the Middle East peace process. Not that I'm defending previous administrations, which have always skewed towards Israel, but at least they stayed the hand of Israel and prevented Israel from carrying out some of its most egregious human rights abuses against Palestinians, whereas we saw, for instance, with the Israeli invasion or bombing, saturation bombing of Lebanon, they were virtually cheered on by Washington. And this has created a very dangerous situation throughout the region because the United States essentially knows only the blunt instrument of force and nothing else. And that, in the context of the Middle East, is equivalent to essentially dumping gasoline all over the fire.
Fawaz, it seems to me America acts more like a pyromaniac fireman. It wants to go after Al-Qaeda, and it actually succeeds, according to all kinds of estimates, in silencing 2/3 of Al-Qaeda leaders. But at the same time, it gets involved in those wars and occupations that inspire and incite and bring more fresh recruits to Al-Qaeda.
No doubts about it. In fact, there is a consensus now, even within the American intelligence community, that the so-called global war on terror has been counterproductive and costly to American interests. It has basically unleashed Muslim anger, anti-Americanism in the region. It has spread, as we said earlier, Chris, social and political chaos in the region. You have overwhelming majorities of Arabs and Muslims, on average 90%, who view the war on terror as a war against Islam and Muslims.
So what happened then to the campaign for the hearts and minds of Muslims? It seems they can't invade their way towards the hearts and occupy the minds.
And guess what the new strategy now, the new policy, the public diplomacy of the United States? They said, we have given up on trying to win Arab and Muslim hearts and minds. Now we want Arabs and Muslims to win the war against Al-Qaeda. And this is, again, the same mindset. The mindset making the war on terror the central plank of American foreign policy.
But if you look back at it, and this is also for Chris, that's actually what happened over the last couple of decades. America creates a mess, whether it's in Afghanistan through covert operation, or whether in occupation in Iraq, or whether wars by proxy in Lebanon and in Palestine. And then it is Arabs, whether they're civil society, tribes, or oppressive governments, clean up after it by suppressing Al-Qaeda on the one hand and try to deal with the security implications on the other. So the Arabs have been, in fact, dealing with the threat while America has been deepening that threat.
Well, you're talking about the Arab regimes?
Arab regimes,
well, they've been,
in Iraq it's the Arab tribes.
Right, but if you look at their response, it has been a short-term solution. Let's take Egypt, for example. Egypt has become increasingly repressive under the Mubarak dictatorship. There's been, we were speaking before, a creeping kind of Islamization of Egyptian society, including within the army. And because we don't understand that what drives people to acts of desperation is not sitting down and reading the Quran. It's not this ridiculous idea of Islamofascism. It is the hard, cold, long, slow drip of repression, of indignity, of humiliation, of abuse, of impoverishment that pushes people into acts of desperation. And when you address those fundamental issues, that is the way you break terror. And you can't have a war on terror. Terror is a tactic. It has been with us since Sallust wrote about it in the Jakartan Wars. It will be with us always. We have to begin to understand what it is that is so distorted within those societies, and we bear a great deal of culpability for that.
But even if we accept the premise of the so-called war on terror, Can you win such war if it's not credible
Well,
in the eyes of Muslims and Arabs?
let me just take the issue of the Palestinians. You know, when I first went into Gaza in 1988, Hamas virtually didn't exist as an organization. Fatah was a secular opposition movement. And the Israeli policy was one disaster after another.
Neither did Hezbollah before the invasion.
Exactly. Hezbollah greeted, the South Lebanese greeted initially the Israelis as liberators.
But these organizations have nothing to do with Al-Qaeda or
right.
what
And
we're
they
talking
also
about
have
today.
but they are radical organizations that have responded to disastrous policies on the part of foreign occupiers.
Are they radical organizations?
And as you asked earlier, Marwan, what are the implications? Let's take the question of democratization. At the heart of American policy since 9/11 was or is the idea to spread Jeffersonian democracy in the heart of the Muslim world. Let's look at the Arab world today. Can anyone say here, Chris, that Iraq now is an American-style democracy?
Right.
Is Iraq now an authoritarian state? I mean, the United States now is helping to build a sectarian-based government along the same lines of Lebanon itself. You have the Shiites, you have the Kurds, the Sunni Kurds, and the Sunni Arabs. Let's take the rest of the Arab world. The Bush administration has stopped talking about democratization now. Guess what they're talking about, Marwan, now? Basically, stable-oriented states, our allies. Stability over liberalization and democratization, because after 7 years of a major war with tremendous implications, in fact, the region now, as autocratic, as authoritarian, and guess what, Chris? Even the progressive and liberal voices, and you know this more than anyone else, Marwan, in the region are saying we have been hurt by America's preponderant military intervention in the region because America is so much resented.
Right.
And in fact, American policy has empowered the reactionary and the militant voices.
I want to stay with you on that point, Professor Georges. Tell us, Fawaz, now we understand America is not popular. I think all the polls also show us that. How popular is Al-Qaeda?
Al-Qaeda, Chris, now, in the Arab and Muslim world, is facing an existential crisis of authority and legitimacy. Not only Arab and Muslim public opinion has turned against Al-Qaeda, in fact, there is a war within Al-Qaeda. Top officials, top associates of Osama bin Laden, Ayman Zawahiri, have taken Osama bin Laden directly and blamed him personally for the misfortunes.
And how do the other jihadist group view Al-Qaeda?
And this is, again, if you really delve deeper into what's happening within the jihadist movement itself, you realize
Islamic fundamentalist.
you're talking about, you might say, local resistance groups.
Okay.
I mean, in the last 2 years, both Osama bin Laden and Ayman Zawahiri vehemently criticized and attacked Hezbollah, the Lebanese resistance movement, and Hamas, the Palestine resistance movement, and basically in the strongest terms. And Hamas also...
And today they attacked Iran.
Absolutely, and the Shiites. And what I'm trying to say is that contrary to the dominant perception or misperception in the United States, Al-Qaeda is more of a security nuisance. Al-Qaeda is a mutation of a large, huge Islamist movement. The large components of the jihadists and the Islamist movements not only have not joined Al-Qaeda, but have attacked Al-Qaeda since 9/11.
But Chris, Fawaz talks about a nuisance.
I think that the exclusive and narrow focus on Al-Qaeda as a threat, as I was saying earlier, essentially diverts us from what it is that is fueling the rage and violence against the United States, which may come under the rubric of Al-Qaeda, but is something else, is something that is fueled by a foreign intervention, massive acts of violence, cultural, linguistic, historical insensitivity, and until we begin to deal with this region of the world as adults, instead of children with bombs, which is essentially what we have become. What we are doing is only empowering the extreme. What we are doing is, in essence, in the name of Al-Qaeda, declaring war on a culture, declaring war on a race, declaring war on a religion, out of our own ignorance, out of our own misunderstanding, and that, of course, thrills the radicals and is deeply counterproductive.
Gentlemen, thank you so much. We're going to have to end it there. And we will see you next week. We will try to reassess America's, or the logic behind America's war on terror.